Mission Atlantic, to ensure a sustainable future for the Atlantic Ocean. Integrated Ecosystem Assessment, or IEA, is a holistic approach to managing ecosystems by evaluating the cumulative impacts of natural variation and human activities. It follows an IEA loop that starts with scoping the system, together with stakeholders developing indicators, analysing the risks from and to different parts of the system, testing potential future scenarios under natural and anthropogenic change, and refine focuses on revising and improving the assessments based on the outcomes and insights gained from earlier stages in the cycle. This process helps balance trade-offs between ecological health, social well-being, and economic viability, ensuring sustainable use and conservation of ecosystem services. The indicator development phase is crucial for monitoring the health and trends of the ecosystem. By developing and selecting robust, relevant metrics to monitor ecological, social and economic dimensions, managers and decision makers can identify and respond to developing challenges in an informed and timely manner. In this video, we consider how ocean models can provide data for analyses at large scales or in locations and times where we don't have observations. Our guide, Yuri, introduces a range of different types of ocean models before focusing on the innovations Mission Atlantic has brought to global ocean modelling and how to access these. Using examples from the Mission Atlantic case studies, Yuri illustrates the utility of having global ocean models for universal comparisons, to derive indicators, to undertake risk assessments, and to investigate outcomes under various environmental and management scenarios.
Hi, I'm Yuri Artioli from Plymouth Marine Laboratory in the UK. I'm a marine ecosystem modeler, meaning that I build and use computer models to study how marine ecosystem works and how they respond to external pressure like climate change or human activities. This short training course aims at illustrating how ocean models can support the Integrated Ecosystem Assessment Cycle, or IEA. Because of their ability to produce synthetic data about the marine environment and to help in understanding the complex dynamic that governs them, the ocean models can support the entire IEA cycle. But it is during the central part of the IEA that can be definitely most helpful, meaning during the indicators phase, the risk analysis, and especially for scenario testing. I will be showing how models can support IEA with an example from one specific type of marine model. But before delving into that, it's worth noting that there are many different types of marine models and they can all be very helpful in IEA. Few examples. Some marine models focus on one particular aspect or just a single species. For instance, here you can see an example from the UK Met Office that has used a wave model to assess the impact on significant wave height of 3 consecutive storms that hit in the British Isles in February 2022. This second example comes from our Mission Atlantic colleagues from CLS, Lorraine Merillier and Anna Conchon, that used their seaboarding model to project the dynamics of skipjack tuna in the equatorial and tropical Atlantic. Other models instead cover the entire marine ecosystem rather than focusing on one particular aspect, but in a very simple spatial representation. This is the case, for instance, of Strat-E2E, another model that we extensively used in Mission Atlantic, and it will be shown in more detail in another tutorial. These models simplify the domain in just a few boxes, as you can see here, but it includes all levels of the ecosystem, from physics to microscopic creatures like plankton, up to fish and top predator, and they even include fishery and other human activities. Here an example from the Barents Sea implementation provided by Jack Laverick from University of Strathclyde, another Mission Atlantic colleague, that shows how smaller organisms like plankton have a very distinct seasonal cycle in this region, the blue line in the plot, and how instead the bigger organism like, for instance, polar bear, shown in yellow, has a much slower dynamic. And you can also see how then the different groups interact with each other and how they respond to the respective dynamics. And finally, on the other extreme of the spatial representation, there are models that have much higher spatial resolution, like this global model that simulates the currents of the ocean with a resolution of about 10 kilometers, or this local model for the Plymouth Sounds, the area where I live, that can go down to few meter resolution, and it's therefore able to solve resolve human structure, like for instance ports. The model system that I will be focusing on for the rest of the training is called NEMO AirSim, and is built around two different models that are coupled together and run simultaneously. NEMO is a physical oceanography model that simulates the physical environment, meaning the temperature, the salinity, and how the water moves. The picture on the left here shows the current speed in the Northwest Atlantic, for instance. AirSim, that is represented by the schematic in the middle, is a biogeochemical model that simulates the cycling of the major chemical elements like carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus across the marine food web, from the zoochemical to macroscopic algae called phytoplankton and small grazers, the zooplankton, and some of the organisms living in the seafloor. This is the same type of model that are used to inform IPCC in their assessment of climate change. Compared to those models, however, the model system that we have implemented in Mission Atlantic have several innovations. First of all, the resolution we use is higher compared to that one, and is a quarter of a degree, or about 25 kilometers. And this has not is not a resolution that has been usually used in IPCC until now. And also we have improved the representation of several physical processes, like for instance the vertical diffusion or tides. On the biogeochemical side, AirSim has a more detailed representation of the planktonic food web compared to the traditional biogeochemical model used in IPCC. And it also has a representation of chemical and biological process in the benthos that is usually very, very simple in those models. But let's see now a few examples of products that we have produced in Mission Atlantic with NEMO AirSim to support the IEA process. Here we can see the sea surface temperature as simulated by the model from 1990 to 2020. It is possible to see the latitudinal gradient, with the equatorial region permanently warmer than 20 degrees and the cold higher latitude with temperature around or below zero. It is also possible to see the symmetrical seasonal cycle, with the warm season moving from the northern hemisphere to the southern one and vice versa, as well as the warm Gulf Stream going from the eastern coast of the US, warming up the North European waters. The plot on the top shows the average temperature of the whole Atlantic, and despite all the seasonal and interannual variability, it is possible to clearly see a warming trend in the 30 years analyzed here. But the model can go further than providing information at surface, something that also satellite observation can do, especially for something like temperature. And they can simulate what happens in the interior of the ocean, so providing information below the surface. If we focus, for instance, here at a transect at 36 north, going between North Carolina and Gibraltar Strait, and we focus on the top 200 meters, we can see at the dynamic of chlorophyll, that is an indicator for the amount of phytoplankton or microscopic algae present in the water. And we can see how every year the blooms, so the increase in phytoplankton starts at surface, but then in the middle during summer, the peak is reached actually in the intermediate water between 50 and 75 meter depth. And this feature is well known, has been observed also with in situ monitoring, and is called the deep chlorophyll maximum. But the model can provide this information with a much higher frequency or spatial coverage that would be impossible to do with direct observation, and also would be damnably expensive. In addition to provide information at large whole ocean basin scale, models like this can also be used to compare and contrast the different areas to understand better their differences and their dynamic. Here, for instance, we compare the surface chlorophyll as simulated by the model in the Celtic Sea and in the southern Brazilian shelf. Blue line is for the Celtic Sea and the orange one is for the southern Brazilian shelf. That are two of the Mission Atlantic case studies. Chlorophyll in the Celtic Sea has a typical cycle for temperate region, with very low value in winter due to the lack of light, and intense bloom in spring and summer. While in the southern Brazilian shelf, the regional value the range of value is much smaller, a pattern typical for tropical area. And thanks to some of the innovation introduced in the Mission Atlantic simulation, we are also able to better appreciate difference at even a smaller scale. Here, for instance, we compare the variability of chlorophyll in three parts of the southern Brazilian shelf. In the northern part, the blue line, we can see how there is a very small and almost constant value of chlorophyll. For the central part, the orange line, we can see a much more regular seasonal cycle with higher mean value, due to the higher amount of nutrient available in this coastal area. The gray line show the case for the southernmost part of the southern Brazilian shelf that is highly influenced by the large discharge of the Uruguay River, one of the biggest river in the Atlantic, and we can see how this area is influenced by this river outflow with a much higher variability and is almost erratic in behavior. They now have shown how models like Nimerson can be a very useful tool to provide information about the present and recent past state of the marine ecosystem and how this changes. But it is in modeling future alternative scenarios that models really reach their unrivaled power. In Mission Atlantic, we have run Nimerson under different climate change scenarios. Here you can see an example and a projection of surface pH. That is one of the essential ocean variables and is the indicator for ocean acidification in the Sustainable Development Goal 14.3. The example that you see here is the projection under the SSP 3 7.0 scenario, one of the high emission scenarios considered in the last IPCC report. The animation clearly shows the progress of ocean acidification with the whole Atlantic mean in the plot on top that you can see how steadily decrease. And also you can see that the background color of the animation goes from blue to a more and more intense yellow. Despite the homogeneous increase of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the main driver of ocean acidification, the model is projecting quite different decreasing trend in pH in various areas. Here we can see an example for the Azores on top and for the southern Brazilian shelf in the bottom plot. And we can see that in the high emissions scenario, in the Azores, the surface pH is projected to drop of about 0.25 units pH, while in the Brazilian shelf, this is about 30% less severe, the acidification. And the model is also able to show how implementing mitigation policies that limits the emission of CO2, like in the SSP 1.2.6 climate change scenarios, the pH will stop decreasing by 2040, 2050, and then will stay constant until 2070. So we can see how these mitigation policies can be effective in stop further acidification of the ocean. It should by now be clear how models can be good tool to use either in isolation or even better complementing and integrating observation to calculate a wide range of indicators that are needed in the IEA process. In Mission Atlantic, indeed, we have used a series of data-driven indicators like the one shown here on fish stocks or on pressure like catches or on activity like oil extraction, together with model-driven indicator like this set of example for climate indicator like temperature, oxygen, and pH. And while some of these environmental indicators that have been derived from models can definitely be observed as well, it is very difficult, as I said earlier, and expensive to do so at larger scale or in remote area like in areas beyond national jurisdiction. Models can also be used in the risk analysis stage of the IEA, and they can be used to identify hotspots of risk and vulnerabilities in the region. Here, for instance, we use the regional implementation of Nimerson to highlight the areas of the North Sea seafloor that is at risk of low oxygen condition under both the current climate, the set of map on the left, and under end of the century under the RCP 8.5 climate change scenario. Furthermore, models can be used also to assess the uncertainty around the indicators of these future projections. In the IPCC report, the future projections are always shown as a band around the mean value. And here, for instance, you can see the projection of sea level rise in various scenarios, and you can see how every single scenario has a colored band representing the likely range of sea level rise in each of those scenarios. But models also can provide information on the unlikely but catastrophic scenarios, like the one represented by the dashed line in the plot that shows an unlikely but very damaging scenario of a sea level rise of more than 1.5 meters by the end of the century. Finally, I've demonstrated how models are a unique tool to assess impact of alternative scenarios. Here another example also related to climate change with a set of indicators for the area of Azore under different climate change scenarios like temperature, oxygen, and pH. But it's not just about climate change. Here another example from a different project, the UKRI funded project, South Asian Nitrogen Hub, where we used a regional implementation of NEMO for South Asia to assess the impact of the coastal environment of a series of policies aimed at reducing the emission of nitrogen in South Asia, like changing agricultural practices, better sewage treatment, or reducing emission from transport. The yellow time series show the eutrophication indicators in various parts of South Asian shelf, if no further mitigation measures are taken. So it's basically a continuation of the current state. The green line shows the improvement in this indicator if a series of technological measures are implemented in the South Asian region, and the red shows the further benefit that it could be achieved if on top of those technical measures also changes in diet are assumed. Marine model can therefore provide a wealth of useful information for manager or of marine resources or policymakers. And they can do so by informing and supporting the IEA process, but also directly. And here an example on how models and data have been used together in the recent quality status report on the Northeast Atlantic released by OSPAR, that is the Oslo Paris Convention for the Protection of Marine Environment of the Northeast Atlantic. In the report, as I said, both observation and model have been used to assess the current trend of pH, and a similar approach now of integrating data and models is being adopted to assess the vulnerability of marine species to climate change and ocean acidification. Similarly, the European Commission also uses marine model to inform its policies on control, for instance, of eutrophication and nutrient emission in support of the EU Marine Strategy Framework Directive. These couple of maps show the assessment of the benefits that a reduction in the emission of nutrients would produce in two eutrophication indicators, chlorophyll on top and bottom oxygen below. These are only some of the examples that marine models are used to inform policy making, but models are more and more being used for this as well as for managing marine resources, with the Great Barrier Reef in Australia, for instance, being another very good example of where models are used. I have shown how large coupled oceanographic biogeochemical models can be used in support of IEA for management of marine resources and for policy development. But are these models readily available to manager and policymaker to be used in the IEA process? The couple models shown here unfortunately require quite a large computational power to be run, and they usually require high performance computer and specialist expertise to set up and run this simulation. However, more and more of these simulations are made publicly available so that they can be used by people and institutions. So you can't run the model and so design the different experiment and the different scenario, but you can use the model that are available to inform the IEA process that you're managing. Just to name some example of sources for this type of model output. The output of the climate model behind the IPCC report are available through the World Climate Research Program, and there are also various operational oceanography programs around the world that can provide output of this type of model. The Copernicus Marine Service, managed by the EU, is one of the more comprehensive ones and provides data both for the global ocean as well for the European seas. Further examples are the E-Reefs system for the Great Barrier Reef in Australia, the Integrated Indian Ocean Forecasting System managed by INCOIS, and the Ocean Forecasting System of NOAA in the US. Usually all these services and all these models provide data in netcdf files, a file format that can be read and manipulated by many data analysis language like R, Python, and MATLAB. There are also software packages that are specifically built to handle output of coupled model like the one that I've just described, like BGC Val2, that is built specifically for output of the IPCC model, or the PML NC toolkit that is handling various type of couple marine models systems. We reached the end of this training session, which have given you a taste of how marine models can be used in the IEA process and more generally to support manager and policymaker. And I hope I have instilled at least the curiosity to look for more details about the various resources mentioned here and to contact either me or other marine modelers who work in your region to support your IEA activities. Before I leave you, a huge thank you to all my colleagues who contributed their material for this talk, and in particular to Yuri Mora from PML, Anna Katavouta, James Harle and Jason Holt at NOC, and Giovanni Galli, formerly at PML, now at OGS in Italy, who have been instrumental to set up and run the Mission Atlantic simulation with NIMO AirSim that I've shown here. Goodbye.